And we're live. Hi, everyone. Number one Marmaduke fan here. And today I'm joined by Durakken, who is the co-creator of The Veil War, which is currently on Indiegogo. Say hi to everyone.
Hello. It's
So,
Dragon, by the way.
Drakken?
Dragon. Just Dragon. Like Draogn.
Gotcha. All right. Sorry.
Everyone messes it up.
I had my, what do you call it, dyslexic moment on your username. All right.
No,
So,
no, everyone does that, so it's
okay.
fine.
So Dragon, I think it'd be fun for us to bring up on my screen. I'm going to do a screen share of the Indiegogo page,
Yep.
and that way we can kind of like look at the images and get some inspiration from that, because I'm really interested in the art and the basic idea for your project. So I'm presenting to everyone my screen, and here is some art for the Veil War. So I mean, I read the basic description of it, and the Veil War. What's interesting about it to me is you kind of have this, Tolkien-esque, like classic 1980s vibe to some of the monsters, but you also have a real world setting for it. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Veil War is, and maybe like how you came up with this idea in the first place?
Basically, the Veil War is because there's a barrier between the fairy realm and humanity. There's always been like in the past, there's always been some people that don't like that, and so they've tried to bring it down. Well, in this case, there's actually a powerful sorceress that comes about, and she's going about trying to take it down, but it's for peaceful reasons. Uh, and it's for peaceful reasons, and it's for she's trying to unite all the sides into a single empire, into a single world, single empire, single thing like that, so that she rules the world.
Mm.
But she's coming out as a peace ambassador of, we need to get rid of guns, we need to uh take away the power of our governments, the type that exists now, where people think that it's a good idea to strip the citizenry of guns.
So there's an aspect where she's kind of got this utopian vision, right?
Yeah,
So she has
yeah,
this utopian vision. She kind of erases the veil between the normal world and like the world that's full of, monsters and mythic creatures. And then all heck breaks loose in this war, right?
yeah. She's got a plan to how she will conquer both sides, and whether that works or not is what happens. Uh,
And this was originally an idea for a game design, correct?
yeah, it was supposed to be. Well, that's why it starts off in with a few pictures of like the world falling apart, already fall apart with like that picture.
This one with all the skeletons.
Yeah, that's 1,500 years in the future,
E.
and basically what has happened in the future is that she's reconstructed the world, and now she like everything's been forgotten about the modern world. Everything's been combined. There's mages that act as her warriors. The world has been set up so that there's a few like countries, but they're more like states,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a sports war game where some get territory because they're winning at the sports war game, but
Mm-hmm.
no one dies in it.
Gotcha.
And the premise of that is like it was supposed to be an RPG where one of the mages forms a group and they go find out little clues about the actual history of what has happened and go and defeat her.
Fascinating. So this concept then led you to work with some other creative people who are anonymous or maybe working under pen names, right? So you've worked with a co-writer and an artist on this project, and they're anonymous. Is that right?
Uh, Co-writer, two artists, and two colorists.
Okay. Wow.
But they will be the colorists. I won't. All the colors will be redone because we can't use any of the colors because it would clash too much because it'd be like three different styles at that point.
Right.
So If we get a color, which is the stretch goal, it'll be done by the same person who will be doing the cover and fixing up the few
Got you to
flaws
cut
in the things.
to have stylistic consistency. So the
Yeah.
color we're seeing isn't an example of what the final color will be. It's just an example of what we might be able to expect
Yeah.
from
What
the.
type of what you can see from like a professional grade colorist.
Yeah. So I noticed this when I was flipping through it, but not only is there like this, painterly aspect to everything, even like the art is reworked a little bit, or maybe it shows a bit more of the art. Like in the black and whites, it's cropped a little tighter, and then in the colored version, it zooms out a little bit. Uh, was that a so this colorist isn't the final colorist for the project necessarily, but was that the colorist's idea, or was that more like the? Is that true of the line art as well?
What do you mean cropped out and
So
all like
like
that?
notice how like the big I guess orc leader here, it's a bit more cropped in, like right around his thighs, and then
Okay,
in the color vision it shows like all his knees down to his boots.
I didn't realize that, but don't. I don't think I cropped it out that much, so I have to say that's on him.
Okay.
Because what happened is I'm obsessive about getting lines straight, and a lot of the files are sort of turned. And so what I did is put digital lines across it and like sort of cropped it out. You know, when you're fixing an image, it sort of
Yeah.
crops it out a bit. I didn't think it was that much, but
So
uh,
there might be a little flexibility in the line art
yeah,
between this
yeah,
and the
yeah,
final
yeah,
version. Yeah.
yeah.
So something that maybe I'd like your feedback on this. Like, how did you pick the art style you wanted for this? Because I noticed, not only is there that Tolkien vibe, like these guys give me a really strong Gremlins vibe from, the Steven Spielberg movie. There's a lot of emphasis on like a really, heavy line weight in the front and a light line weight in the back. So it really just looks like a dope, J.R.R. Tolkien style war with all kinds of crazy creatures, and I'm digging it. What kind of decisions did you have to make for finding the right fit artistically for your story?
Well, initially I wanted it to be more anime feel, but that was a hard style to find. Once I got with this writer, uh he was suggesting different artists, and pretty much I just selected the artist that looked closest to like D&D and that feeling.
Yeah, let me think. What is your work process like? So you've worked with another writer, you've worked with another artist. Do you ever like look at their sketches and give feedback on that, or are you a bit more of a hands-off type where you say, "I'm going to let you guys, run with this," and kind of like give you some creative leeway? Describe a little bit about what it's like behind the scenes working on the project.
That's actually kind of funny because uh, with regards to this project, um, I'm hypercritical, so I sort of had to shut my mouth for a bit because the writer was like, "You do know that these guys are about to walk, right?" But I didn't think I gave him that much hypercriticalness. But I was like, "Okay, I'll take a step back, see what you guys can do." So
It's
so
kind of a it's kind of a learning experience.
yeah, because this was the first time I was actually doing anything.
So
The writer said that he had worked on comics before and he knew what he was doing. So I was like, okay, I'll take a chance to, learn from you, and you can help me. You can work for me, and I'll pay you, and you can teach me the ropes, sort of.
I gotcha. So something interesting about this project is this was worked on and most of the line art was completed in the early 2000s, right? But you haven't had an occasion to publish it yet.
Yeah, about like I was funding the entire thing, and that took because my financial situation is weird, but it took from I don't know, I'd say around 2006 to around 2010 to finance to where we got. And the what we were going to do is put out a 4 issue. uh we had a 4 issue plan, and then that was going to go into a ongoing. um the After we saw that the first issue wasn't long enough for what we wanted to do, we turned that into a 48 page issue, and then the next ones were going to be 24 pages. So it ended up with like 3 comics. But then the funding ran out. The communication between writers and artists, and that all is kind of screwy. Um, so I have the script for the second issue, which is a script for the first issue, second issue, no script for the third issue, but art up till I have like 46 pages of the first issue, which is why this is 46 pages. I was going to see if I could get the another 2 pages done, the original 2 pages, but I rewrote it, so it didn't need that. So it changed into 46. What happened there is the artist kind of like copped out. He like his scanner broke, and I was like, okay, here's the money to replace the scanner, and that he's like, yeah, I'm done. So that's the last I heard of him.
The artist of this current issue has left the project since completing this, right?
Yeah, all the artists have left, and
okay.
so it's the writer. So if I continue, I'm going to be writing past the second issue.
Gotcha. So funding this will print the first issue, and it'll also hopefully fund like the continuation of the story in issues maybe 2 through 4. Correct?
It will. It'll print the first issue, and then if it gets enough money, then I'll fund another project, which depending on how things, whether people like it or not. Because if people look at this and they go, no, we don't like this, I'd rather spend the money on something that they might like. But if people like it, then yeah, I'm gonna continue on with it and fund the next book.
And you've got a pretty straightforward funding tier. So one thing I appreciated is you have like a good like $10 tier for people to hop on to get a digital copy of the book. Like one of the things that a lot of people I know have talked about is it's really hard to, like fund $25 book or $50 books after $50 books. So you do have a good jumping on point for people with a tighter budget. And then you've got, the physical, the signed physical, and like people can get multiple copies or 10 copies. I'm sorry, 5 physical copies.
Yeah, I wish that price could be lower, but just looking at the financial side, it's really hard to get lower than that unless you're selling a ton of comics.
I think it's just true about Indiegogo projects that because you're doing a small print run, like they're all going to be like, so it probably like at least as expensive as any modern comic book, and probably a little more with shipping. So what I do appreciate is you've got a real art emphasis in this first issue, where like there's like lots of promises of war and chaos and death, and you're even talking about how when this was a game idea, there was this mystery aspect of trying to piece together like how did this utopian world come to be, and finding out that maybe there's a lot of I think there's something really resonant about a utopian vision of society that's built on mass graves. Like it's not overtly political, but I think you're speaking to something that's kind of true, which is that these creepy utopian visions, they're never as rosy as they seem at first glance. So I'm clicking with that a lot.
Yeah, it was really weird when I went back and reread it. I was like, this completely reflects the modern situation. How did that happen 10 years ago?
So I want to talk a little bit about like what it'll take to get this funded. So you're looking at making $3,000 to get printing, which I think is completely reasonable. I think I've seen a lot of projects aim for that, and you're hoping to hire a new colorist as an $8,000 stretch goal. But because the line art is completely done, getting this project funded will let you hire a letterist and get this book printed. Correct?
Yeah, the $3,000 goal is for printing, for ISBN, logo, cover, fixing a few problems. What else? It's enough to get the book to the black and white stage, fully lettered and printed, and to the people.
And you've mentioned in your Indiegogo campaign that you're hiring Jay Ishiro, who is the author of Case File Arkham,
yes.
Potentially to be the letterist if this gets funded. Could you tell us a little bit about how'd you get in touch with Jay Ishiro and what you like about Ishiro's work?
pretty much when I first talked to him, it was I was for, I had an idea for a writing group, and I contacted him. That I'm like, I don't have a following at all, so I wouldn't have any reach. So it'd probably be better if someone with more reach uh started it. And from that, we just kept on. We talked more and more. Had mentioned that he had on one of the streams that he also offers lettering, and I was like, well, I need a letterist. uh, and he was also offering a good deal on lettering, so that's why I reached out to him. Um, Also, what's his name? I think it's Eric Weathers that does a lot of the lettering on a lot of the books. I felt
Right.
that he does a lot and he might be overbooked, and I don't really have a large catalog of letterists that I know of. And also, I've tried to letter this in the past. That was one of the plans, and that did not go well. So,
It is a tricky thing. Like people think, oh, it's just letters, but you have to be really, persnickety to get it to look right.
yeah, I'll put my hand in for like I can do a decent job maybe at drawing if I really put my mind to it, and I can do a almost pro color like that temporary cover right there on the tiers.
On this one,
Yeah, I
yeah,
colored that.
nice.
That's not rendered though, and I was doing it just because I needed a temporary cover.
Right.
So see, I can get to a almost there level, and my writing I think is pro level, but when it comes to lettering, I just look at them like, no, that's wrong. Everything that I see about it is wrong. Just
It doesn't hurt to find a professional for
yeah.
some of those like sub jobs. Yeah, division of labor. I'm kind of interested in maybe your history with comics, like the kinds of comics you've read, the kind of comics that have inspired you. Because you mentioned a anime or manga influence in the kind of like the early planning stages before it moved in a bit more of a D&D art style direction. What inspires you?
Oh, generally I'm just inspired by everything, and I just take in a lot of content. Like early on, I like when I was 10 or so, I got a few comics here and there uh, to read, mainly DC. Um, then when I went to high school, it was more Dragon Ball Z, Sailor Moon. When I went to college, which is about when this stuff was coming about, I was introduced to Slayers and more of the anime stuff. And Slayers is a fantasy style D&D anime. Uh, the character has like this super magical power where if she uses it, the entire universe will die. So she
Huh.
can't use it, and it's her only spell.
Oh wow.
So
I think I've heard of Slayers. I haven't sat down and watched it yet, but it has that great old, like late 80s, early 90s vibe to its art direction. So
yeah. Um, After that, I pretty much got into manga and anime a lot. So I've read a ton of that stuff. And when I say ton, I mean like a lot. I like on a daily level, I would read like 10 to 20 issues a day for some of this stuff. Then around 2008, I think, around that point, I heard about DCUO coming coming out, and I wanted to create a character, and I'm one of those types of people that like to have my characters in MMORPGs
mhm.
like actually have a background and know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So I was like, how the heck am I going to do this? And the answer was read all of the Bat Family's comics back
Oh,
from like the origin. So I read it from 1986, around that point where Jason Todd was just being phased out, and Crisis on Infinite Earths happened.
yeah.
And I started from there, and I read everything up until the present day, and it ended up being around 4,000 comics.
Wow.
I got to 2011, read New 52. I was like, well, I haven't read all these characters, so maybe they're different from what I thought. I want to give them a chance. So I read every single book of the New 52 for like 3 or 4 months, and then slowly it just whittled down and whittled down and whittled down.
So
Um,
it's an understatement to say you're a DC super fan, right?
I wouldn't say like I wouldn't consider myself a fan, but I don't know. I'm hard to classify in that. I
You
wouldn't consider myself a fan, but yeah,
you read it out of interest, right? And
yeah,
maybe like for potential ideas.
yeah, yeah. I've also read Ultimate Marvel. I've never really liked regular Marvel.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, in 2013, they did that. They showed all the origin stories of the villains. They did that villain month, and they released that Mr. Freeze origin, which completely destroyed that character.
Yeah.
And after that, I was like, yeah, I'm just done with comics, and that made Marvel suffer because I stopped reading Ultimate Marvel too. I just was done with that side. Still read manga all the time. Uh,
What are some other manga that speaks to you? Do you look at it like I've noticed that some people like they are into like manga period, like that's their thing, and some people they're like picking and choosing like a few favorites from Western comics, a few favorites from Japanese comics. How would you describe how you pick what to read?
oh well, when some I usually just I do more of the fan translation sites. So when I look at the fan translation site, they usually have like a list of all the stuff that's coming out. So I click on it, read the description. If it's interesting, I give it a read. That's pretty much what I do. Not anything in particular that I really care about, like in that, but I find I like shonen style stuff, sci-fi style stuff, band or idol manga or
Mhm.
whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
Uh, Isekai manga, like Sword Art Online, Log Horizon.
Yep.
Uh, I like Gantz, Liar Game, Death Note. Uh, oh, I'm really bad with names, but especially with the manga and such, because it's like not only am I bad with names, then I have to deal with a foreign language where the
Right.
names don't
Cultural
recognize
barrier.
me. Yeah.
Like they all start. Anytime I'm reviewing a manga, there's always some like Takatatsu. I don't know. I forget everyone. You're spiky haired boy number two.
And especially it gets bad with Korean manga with the character name because I understand how they're formed, but it's like Bob Rin Tae. It's like, okay, there's Bob Rin Tae, and now here's Bob Rin K. It's like,
Yeah.
come on, guys, really?
Do you have any thoughts on? I've only read like maybe a couple Korean manga. Period. Do you have any thoughts on maybe Korean manga compared to Japanese manga, or any like favorites that have stood out to you?
I'd have to remember which ones are Korean and which ones are Japanese.
Right.
None of them are come to mind which ones are Korean, which ones are Japanese. Right now, I'm reading The King's Avatar. Um, what's this one? Solo Leveling, which is having trouble getting translated, where Tencent is claiming its ownership, but it's such a horrible translation, and I'm pretty sure the author hasn't sold them his rights.
Wow.
Uh, but everyone loves it, so everyone's going, this is a fan story. It's not a actual translation. Um, so
Do you,
that one's good from Chinese. I mean
do you
from
have any
Korean.
do you have any thoughts on kind of like this ongoing controversy about like political translations of manga and anime, where some people believe the studios are kind of deliberately stripping anything that might offend, like uh, hypersensitive American sensibilities.
It depends on the level of it because I know they do it. Um, because there's always been this thing about Japanese cultures when they're putting out games. They're like, well, the Americans can't handle the difficulty level of our games, so they don't release the games over in America.
Yeah.
They do this similar things with Japanese anime and manga, where I know with Naruto, they don't refer to a rice ball as a rice ball; they refer to it as a donut. It's
Right.
really weird stuff like
So,
that.
and sometimes it's kind of cheesy and fun, right? Like for
Yeah,
Pokemon localization. But uh, there's also like this question, like, are translators really are they trying to capture like the spirit of the Japanese original, or do they have like some sort of, I don't know, political motivation to translating the way they translate? I don't know.
it,
I
it's
read anime. I've actually kind of tried to stay out of the anime drama scene, and I'm just kind of like hearing things, kind of like along this from the sidelines once in a while.
it's a combination of all of them. Like, so, there is some where the creators are just like, yeah, I want it to flow in America, so they'll when their license is sold to America, the America side also sends it back and gets approval from the creator for their
Mhm.
changes. Sometimes that doesn't happen and they short circuit that, and then you get weirder translations. Sometimes it's like with the DBZ movie, they cut Akira Toriyama completely out of that one
Wow.
for the live action because they didn't believe that he knew anything about how to make a movie.
Oh gosh.
The
Well,
dude
that's what
loves
prompted him.
movies.
That's what lit a fire under him to say, I'm getting back into the manga business, right?
I think so. That's one of the things that he got pissed off for a while, and he didn't want to have anything to do with America
Huh.
for a long time. And then Dragon Ball, not Resurrection F, but Battle of the Gods came out, and it blew up. And he's like, "Yeah, that seems like a good idea." So, it just depends on the creator, the license holder, all like that, how it all works out. There was one that I was going to mention. Can't remember.
You've mentioned that you would like to keep publishing the Veil War if people resonate with it, if it clicks with them. Do you have any other thoughts on other projects that might be down the road for you? Have you considered other genres because of all the reading you've done in multiple genres?
Yeah, every single I've written. The plan is actually to create a superhero universe, and the first one for that one is called Arcus, which is a demigod. Pretty much, it's Superman mixed with Wonder Woman mixed with Hercules,
Hmm.
where he comes he's a descendant of a demigod in our mythological past, but he was sent away to another world because of Hera Zeus stuff. That world gets destroyed. He comes back to Earth and gets raised, a la Clark Kent. Comes to the big city, and he's been told all of his life not to interfere, not to show his power. He doesn't have any clue about what's going on. He has no idea about all the supernatural stuff. All he knows is that he has all this power. Um, so he starts seeing bad things happen, and he steps in and starts revealing to the world that there's magical powers. And that triggers magic to start being able to influence the world again. Because before, um, it was locked up on the into like uh, what's the word? Not urban, rural areas,
Mhm.
because it's farther away from civilization.
Yeah,
And that's why you hear about the crazy stuff happening out in the woods and all like that, because it's farther
right.
away from civilization. Well, as he reveals himself, people start to believe and allow that stuff back into their world, and that stuff becomes part of the city and part of the regular, like, natural world to what people are thinking. And that triggers that entire universe of powers to come about and gods to come back and all like that. Uh,
It sounds like you're really interested in the like magical world of myth, like creeping its way or bursting, knocking down the door and marching into like the regular civilized world. Would that
yeah,
be right?
it was really weird. I When I picked this back up, I was like, wait a second, I just ripped myself off. I was like, that's kind of weird. But
What's the appeal of like the mythic world of like this magical world that's I think I was reading some Japanese book where they describe it as the land over that away would be kind of like their word for the mystical realms.
well, people like all this stuff. It's the way that we understand the world. we have the world of science, whereas how the world we think it is. But then there's also the mythical world where it's the way how we understand the world. And so when you like start to combine the two, you start to have, I don't know, it's more human, I think. If you go too far one way, you you're losing yourself to that world of like automata and robotics, like a robot type feeling. Whereas if you go the other way, then you're no longer human because you're just losing your rationale. When you combine the two, you get this. It's where humans actually are and where you need to be. Because if you only do one or the other, you end up acting inappropriately.
Mhm.
Because if you're pure logic, pure reason, you never consider that aspect where, you know, I don't know, I'm going to say something controversial here, but let's say you create a situation where you go, okay, no one can have children unless they pass a test that say they're going to be good parents, that they
Mhm.
understand this thing. Now, you would think that's a logical, reasonable thing to have in there, but no one's ever going to go along with that, and that's because there's that human aspect of love and caring for kids, for especially your own kids, and people understand that there's this aspect where you're not going to be able to stop people from acting the way that they're going to act and
Yeah,
have kids.
I think I understand exactly what you're trying to say. Yeah, that they're intellectuals think they can design a world that's perfect for everybody, but they can't anticipate the way people behave because one smarty pants can't design a world that works for millions and millions of people with all kinds of different tastes and emotions, right?
Yeah. And then you have the opposite where if you just go out of your way and you're just like, oh yeah, I don't need logic and reason, then you're not considering people either. You're just acting on base instinct, and you can't have a civilization like that. You can't progress. You're just uh, you're just acting on what you want at that time. So you're gonna end up running into problems with well, I want to eat. Well, that's someone else's food. No, I want to eat, so I'm going to take that food. It's like, well, now you're just stealing someone's food. And if it's you can't plan for the future. If it's you need the food for later on and you're just eating over and over and over and over and you're not considering the future, then you're just going to become fat. You can't hunt, you can't get food later. You just are going to die from that. So you can't have one or the other extreme. You have to have that mix. And that's where humans really are, is that mix.
I dig it. Yeah, you're kind of you're tapping into kind of like that classic uh, idea of the myth is that the myth is kind of where we work out things that are actually true in just our real day to day lives, and the myth helps us. I don't know, like conceptualize that in the form of a story, right?
Well, if you follow Jordan Peterson or the and his understanding of the monomyth,
Mm-hmm.
what you have is the outside world is the land of chaos, and the inside world is the land of order, pretty much. And whenever you come up against something that you don't understand, that is where the hero goes out, and he goes out into the world of chaos. He learns something, and then he brings it back, and that extends the land of order. But you still have this land of chaos there. And the hero actually exists on that boundary because he has to pass between both.
I gotcha. Just out of curiosity, have you ever read J.R.R. Tolkien's poem Mythopoeia?
No.
I think you'd click with it based on what like Jordan Peterson has popularized this. I think Tolkien wrote a poem for C.S. Lewis on the value of myth, and it's really interesting. It's sort of like how Tolkien was trying to like explain to Lewis the ultimate value of myth, because I think Lewis's problem was as kind of like a major you know Lewis is a 20th century Christian thinker. I think he was anticipating like a lot of what would be coming in the 21st century culturally. And so Lewis had this problem. Well, is there a problem with the idea of like living in a world that is a lie, or living in a world that doesn't exist? And Tolkien's idea was that the myth does touch into something that's ultimately true. And so because it does that, then it becomes more than just a fanciful little fairy story. It speaks to us.
Yeah. Have you read Ursula K. Le Guin's Omen Laws?
No, I haven't. What's it about?
It's a little short story about this world where you're in a city and all the needs are met for the citizenry, and there's no hunger, there's no sadness, there's no nothing. But the thing is that these people get drunk, make merriment, and they're just like orgies all over the place.
Mhm.
Secret is that for this to happen, there has to be one little kid in some desolate corner of the world in a room that has to be like tortured and left to like rot in or whatever it is. Like whatever they just have to have this horrible existence.
And
And that
everyone else
has
gets a utopia.
yeah, and everyone knows about this. Now the question at the end is, do you save the child? Do you walk away from the world, that city, knowing that you're going into the world where there's all these problems that you have to face, or do you just live with it? And that's a really interesting thing because that's where the story ends. It's just like, yeah, this is the setting. Now, what do you do with that?
Huh. What's interesting about that is that would usually be like the starting point where the hero would say, I'm going to go save the kid, right? And then he'd have like a big action adventure story to go save the kid. But it reminds me of Philip K. Dick, where sometimes Dick would just write like an interesting setting for a world or like a government, and then Dick would just leave you hanging. I think that's why a lot of science fiction writers like Philip K. Dick is he would just have all of these, crazy creative ideas, and he wouldn't necessarily like go into any depth on any of them. You just come up with this stuff.
Yeah, I was having a bad day one day, and someone posted on Twitter about they posted, I have a post-apocalyptic setting. Do you want to read it? It's like, oh, that doesn't tell me anything.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't tell me. That's a setting. That's not a story. There's nothing there to expand on. There's nothing interesting about that. It's just a setting. Even if you tell me that there's a zombie apocalypse, it's like, okay, well, that happens. What's your story? It's just a setting.
Yeah.
With Omen Laws, it's a really interesting conundrum, especially for the hero, because you go, oh, I'm going to save that child. And it's like, but you're dooming everyone else. Like, by saving that child, you're dooming the rest of the world. And the hero would have to, like, recognize that,
Mhm.
and it would stop him from acting in certain cases.
Or at least give him pause. Right?
Yeah.
Like you would effectively have to be so motivated that uh, you'd need like a kind of a worldview which would say, because that one child is getting screwed, because that child has dignity, then therefore it is moral for me to like, and that would set up the hero against essentially the entire world. The entire world would have to try to
Yeah.
stop that. So it is an interesting premise, really.
It's a utilitarian argument where if everyone else is happy with it, then it doesn't matter if the single person is unhappy with it.
Pontius Pilate's argument: better that one man die than either Pontius Pilate or maybe one of the Pharisees too. Pontius Pilate: better that one man die than that we have all this chaos.
Yeah, and we know Captain Kirk's solution to it because that was an episode of Star Trek.
Oh, you know what? I've actually completely missed the Star Trek mode. So explain that. Explain the episode to me.
Basically, they go to a world. It's everything's taken care of, but they're in a tribal state. They used to be high-tech civilization, somehow fell, and there's an AI that runs everything. And basically, Captain Kirk is like, yeah, no, it's better that you actually get better and learn how to take care of yourselves, and pulls the plug. And then they just go away. It's like really messed up.
Oh gosh, Captain Kirk.
It's like, yeah, everyone's fine in this situation. So if Captain Kirk was in the land of Omen Laws, he'd just be like, yeah, the kid has to go free.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't even matter about anything else.
So even if you have completely good intentions and a completely good argument, there might be consequences to those things that you haven't anticipated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I would save the kid. That would be like my worldview would be, it's not right that your happiness what's the word for it? There's an externality. If my happiness has the externality that it forces like this kid to live in torture, then there's a moral dimension where the goodness I feel about my happiness doesn't justify the other thing. But I think a lot of idealists forget that even like well-intentioned actions could have consequences, and you'd have to wrestle with that. Like the hero has to wrestle with the fact that my decision is going to affect a lot more than just me and this other person.
Yeah, and even if you do actually go and save the kid, guess what? Someone else is going in that hole to fix the situation for everyone else.
Hmm.
So you have to be on guard against that all the time, or else someone else is going in the hole.
But that self-sacrificially.
However they decide.
Okay. Now, wait a second. Is the kid in this story, is the kid self-sacrificial? Is the kid saying, I wish to endure this on behalf of everyone else? Or is the kid forced into the situation?
If I remember right, they are raised there from like birth, pretty much.
So that maybe
So
there's
it's
like
not
this.
self-sacrificial. It's
Huh,
they don't know anymore
huh,
about the world.
wow. Well, I will check it out because I do like, especially when I'm reading manga, like for half the manga I read, I hate it, but I will like maybe like one idea from it, or there'll be like one interesting aspect of it, and I'll immediately start imagining, well, if I didn't like this, what would it take for me to actually like it and enjoy myself? And that kind of gets the creative juices flowing a little bit. And I can kind of tell based on how much you've read and how you talk about it that you've got this process of you're putting all this stuff into your imagination, and I think that's helped you, right?
Yeah, even though I just got called not a reader by some people and got yelled at because of I didn't read Tolkien.
Oh, you
I
haven't
don't.
read Tolkien?
Nah, I hate the Lord of the Rings.
Really?
Well, to
That's
be
fun.
on his level, I hate the first book, first half of the first book of Lord of the Rings because it's the book that made me stop being a reader of like that.
Now, so expand on that a little bit, because yeah, I mean, I can see why that would be a spicy take, because
Because everyone loves Lord of the Rings.
right, and
Yeah,
he kind of created the genre for everyone,
yeah,
really. Like every fantasy story after Tolkien, owes some kind of debt for Tolkien. So, you say you don't like the first half of the first book, Fellowship, right?
well, yeah. Well, back then I was like an avid reader. I read the entire Bible when I was 7, front
Yeah.
to back. I used to read the encyclopedia, front to back, the dictionary, scientific journals, all like that. And then I just read this book and I'm like, yeah, this is garbage. I don't know what's up with this. And I got from the beginning to about the middle where they were leaving, which is about 200 pages.
Yeah.
And that's a bit much, no matter how much you love the series or whatever you think about it. It's like, I don't care what you think about the world building or anything else. That's bad writing. You
I've
can't.
got. So I don't know if I'd go as far as to say it's bad writing, but I've got to be honest. The Hobbit is the only book of Tolkien's that I like to return to again and again, because I think in The Hobbit he wrote for his little kids, and then in
Yeah.
The Lord of the Rings he was trying to write for his adult children,
No,
and
he
I
wasn't
think
even doing that. He was um what he was doing was he wanted to create a new mythology.
yeah,
And in that sense, for what he was doing, great job. He's a great linguist. He's a decent world builder and con linguist. And that's only because he was one of the first, and people have expanded on how to do it and made it so much easier. So you got to understand that, if you're the first, then you're probably not going to be the best.
so
So,
I made myself read the Silmarillion, and I enjoyed it kind of in the way that I might enjoy, I don't know, like ancient myth, in that there's like this huge rush to it, and the language, you're rushing from like epic period of history to epic period of history, but you can't really read the Silmarillion as just like a good old campfire tale. It is Tolkien kind of trying to recreate something that just doesn't exist anymore. Like no one writes in this like grand mythic style anymore. So
and it's slightly better written too, than the Lord of the Rings, in my opinion. But the funny thing with that is, I listened to a lot of audiobooks, and I listened to this in audiobook form, and it's not that it wasn't interesting or anything. It's just that I don't know what it is. I was having one of those days or weeks, whatever it was, that I kept on falling asleep. So
Yeah.
I'd listen to it and I'd fall asleep like 30, 40 minutes into it. I'd wake up like another 40 minutes and I'm like, where did I end? So I'd like go back or I just keep on listening to it. And I don't know like how much of it I remember, how much of it was just made up in my mind, how much of it. So it's like this really dreamy type story for me. Uh, and I feel really awkward about it because I don't know how much of it that I do remember and how much of it that I just came up with, or how much of it is good, how much of it is bad. Um, and that's sort of how you would actually understand those type of tales in like different mythologies and religions. It's the dream time. It's the time when it was like not fully cognizant of these things.
They didn't have the Hollywood TV style of writing. Like
Yeah.
the Iliad, I tried to read the Aeneid, and I was really impressed by the language, but I had no clue what was going on because it was like great epic, God commanding the oceans as the Aeneid escapes Troy, right? And I think maybe I don't know how to feel about it. Like on one hand, we've become very literal in our culture, where if you did a TV version of the Aeneid, you'd follow Aeneas and he'd have his, conversation with so and so, right? And it'd be all character focused, and that helps me because then I connect with the characters. Uh, what I I guess what I hate about ancient myth is how hard it is to understand, and what I love about ancient myth is that it's just so different from the typical Hollywood show, and I don't really know how to reconcile that in my own mind.
Oh, well, the ancient myths are kind of fun. I don't know, I say more towards the Bible and stuff like that. I haven't read many of the myths directly. Uh, I got them off of I read them piecemeal
Mhm.
and more of a modern interpretation rather than directly from the source a lot of the times. So, even though I was supposed to have read that stuff for my mythology class, I have
Yeah,
like
you got the Cliff Notes version.
well no, I don't I don't read Cliff Notes, but yeah, pretty much. I have the Norse mythology, the Greek mythology, the Aeneid, the Odyssey, and I've read parts of them, but I don't remember much of them from the reading. So it's more that forced to do, or I just understood enough of it from other sources that there was
Mhm.
no point in actually reading them. I should go back and read them. I've been meaning to.
I think it's interesting from the perspective of just seeing people who tell a story completely different than the way we're used to telling stories, right? I that's what I like about fairy tales. I guess fairy tales are a slightly more digestible version of that, where because they were meant to children, it's a little easier to wrap your mind around them. But so many of them are just so weird. Like it was clearly like someone had this crazy idea, right? And they just came up with a story for it, and it doesn't follow this, Hollywood 3 act structure, or there's got to be this scene here where the hero feels bad. They just had this weird idea for like a giant or something.
Well, with regards to mythologies and fairy tales and all like that, what they're doing is you're trying. What they were trying to do is they were trying to tell something about the world that they're living in, or they're trying to tell the history, or they're trying to induce a idea or behavior. Nowadays, we just look at it as entertainment. So there's a complete shift of how we're understanding these things.
Mm.
Now, it might be entertaining, the original stuff, but that's because entertainment helps you learn stuff.
Yeah.
But the initial thing is, no, you're here to learn this stuff, and the reason that we're putting it in this format is so you can learn it. Like you probably have heard of when hunters go to hunt something when they're just about to the day or week before they'll do like a dance ritual, they'll enter solitary confinement, stuff
Hmm.
like that. That is to induce the behaviors of whatever they're hunting.
Hmm.
That's what you're getting out of that. Nowadays that would be reversed to go, okay, you're not trying to induce that behavior, you're trying to connect with that idea so you can be entertained with it.
You're
But
trying to enjoy the thing without having to do the thing.
yeah, you're trying, like in the past, you would be using that knowledge, and then you have to understand that understanding of what they were doing has to be passed down, and so it gets passed down from culturally as in a way that it was that it can be remembered. So you have this story of, the fox, and the fox does this, and the fox does that. You have all these little stories that happen, and sometimes it's like the dog does this, and the fox does this, and the coyote does this, and then all of a sudden they start to merge into this one character. And that's where the myth comes from,
The
because you're getting
metal.
all.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Someone has a really interesting comment that maybe kind of ties into what you're talking about. So the metal, who's a regular here, writes, the best part of old mythology is the lack of canon as we regard it. A story can be different across microcosms of culture, but so can family relations that lead to the stories. So maybe that ties into what you were saying earlier about a story having a purpose. It's supposed to tell you something true that like a lot of like the simple like children's stories have to do with families, being a good kid, being a good parent, that kind of stuff. And
yeah. Don't talk to strangers. Don't walk in their houses because they might cook and eat you.
yep,
Just saying.
good idea.
Yeah, they're like in modern fairy tales, they're all warped because we mainly remember the Disney versions.
Mhm.
And even the version that Disney got it off of is even more modernized. Like what's it about? What's her name? Cinderella. That's
Right.
about that's about a girl's fur slipper that she had made going to find a man that's perfect for her. Now, you know what a fur slipper is. That's metaphor. Uh, so she's finding a guy that fits her. It sounds like a whore to me.
You're saying that the visual imagery of Cinderella has a connection to like a literal like Christian sexual moral, right? You
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
be loose girls, you want to be good.
yeah. You
Yeah,
want the perfect fit. So,
and even in like I think I read like the problem is there's always like multiple versions, but I read the Grimm version on my channel because I was talking about like this feminist idea that Cinderella is just a damsel in distress. She has no agency. And if you read the Grimm version, Cinderella is doing all kinds of cool stuff. She's like making decisions. She's like climbing up trees and vanishing into the night to escape the people trying to capture her. And it's very clear that they were trying to have a like a Christian moral message where like this the spirit of the dove is visiting Cinderella and acting as her guide and her helper.
yeah, and that's true about all the things. And the problem is that when you get into some of the mythology, it's harder to track back farther because of like in Norse mythology and Gaelic mythology, what you have is the Christianized version of those
Hmm.
mythologies rather than what they were originally. So you kind of have to figure out what they are, what they originally were, and where the Christian influences got put in there.
Especially if it was an oral tradition, right?
Yeah.
Because then you don't even have like a record you can look back on.
Well, I'm pretty sure none of the sagas or anything like that were anything other than oral tradition
Mhm.
up until that point. At most, you'll have like a rune for something or other, but you won't have any outright stories for most of this stuff.
I'd really like to do a screen share again so we can bring up the art of the Veil War again because we've had an interesting talk about myth, and I'm kind of interested in maybe like how you'd apply it to your own work. So I'm going to do this screen share thing again. Sweet. So in writing the Veil War, right? So I kind of like picked this up early that you had this interest in like the magical world and the real world, and like uh, the magical world crossing over into the real world. And you've also got this kind of recurring interest in people who have a totalitarian mindset. I think who kind of want to impose their will or create a perfect world for everyone else. So I guess where did this come from? You mentioned like the video game idea aspect. So where did tie in what you're doing in the Veil world with the Veil War with some of what we've been talking about myth?
Um, Well, a lot of that comes from like it's really hard to explain in terms of this in particular, simply because of the weird thing with the co-writer stuff.
Hmm.
Because a lot of this stuff was only like a line in my original ideas, like, and this is the background. Oh, that's really interesting. We're gonna expand on that by like sevenfold. It's like,
Hmm.
so it's kind of hard because I didn't come up with the a lot of the background lore with some of this stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, but like I don't know, like if I was going to apply it, I'd apply it to like the relationship between orcs and goblins and all like that. Like some people have mentioned that they like previously, but the like in D&D, for example, there's this idea that you go from goblin to orc, and it's just an older goblin.
Hmm.
I've never liked that idea. I've always liked playing with the ideas of like okay, when the most people create these, they just sort of like they create the world as it is.
Hmm.
Whereas when I have gone into world building, what I do is I go, how did these things come about?
Yeah.
And I go as back as far as I can into why there is these religions, how tribes spread, how language evolved, all like that. And ultimately, when you get down to it, all of the way that you create a civilization is you have to understand how a civilization understands sex and their relationship and their understanding of gods.
Yeah.
Once you have those two things, everything else builds from that, and you don't need anything else.
Like you can't really imagine a polytheistic world that's a dead ringer for our world because we've been so influenced by monotheism.
Yeah. Um, well, currently we have, but well, that
Maybe up until like the 20th century, right?
that's a complex discussion because I don't consider Christianity monotheism.
Okay, that's interesting. Huh.
Yeah, because it's not. There's the trinary God, which is one. It's like, okay, no, that's not monotheism, guys.
I disagree. I think they're making a distinction between being person, but I'll let you continue with your point.
Well, no, I was just saying that I don't consider that monotheism. But if you are gonna say that's monotheism, then sure, you have monotheistic influence from what about 2,000 years ago. I'd say it started where it became mainly monotheistic in origin. Didn't really take off until around uh, 380. Was it about?
Well,
That's when.
the influence of Judaism would then be like spread by the popularity of Christianity, right? Is that what you're getting
Yeah,
at? Yeah.
yeah. That's when it really became a worldwide monotheistic thing, and that's where the influence are. But the influence for most things are even today. It's polytheistic. It's just we don't call them gods anymore. Like many people have referenced. Um, there's the superheroes are the gods of today, and the heroes and mythology of today. And even before then, we still understand that there's gods such as Zeus, Hera, Hades, all of them. We still like are influenced by those characters, whether you believe in them or not. They're still an influence. Um, and even more so, we're influenced by like Japanese culture, Chinese culture, and all these other cultures that have even more of a wide spectrum of things of gods. So we understand that stuff as an influencing force. So even if we're only talking about monotheism as an influencing force, that range from about maybe I'd say probably around like 900 AD to around maybe 1500 AD is all you get where that being an isolated thing. But even
Now,
that's a little hard to
now,
argue because of the Vikings were coming in at that time too.
now, all when I was saying like monotheism influenced Western culture, I was kind of like narrowly focusing that on Western culture. You're describing more like the broad picture that in the entire world of course we've had, polytheistic faiths. Of course we've had like all kinds of, various cosmologies and various ideas of gods all compete for each
No,
other,
I'm talking
right?
about the Western world. The Western world has had the only time when they've had a solitary thing where it would be monotheism is that really short period, and maybe not even that. We've always had interactions with the rest of the world, and that has brought influences uh, to us for non-monotheistic religions.
Is there a distinction between recognizing competing religions in your thinking and accepting those competing religions? So like a medieval Christian could understand that Islam exists, or they could understand that Buddhism exists, or that they'd understand that the Vikings have their own like set of gods, but that doesn't mean they would necessarily then believe those things are real in the way that
Yeah, it's an actual interesting thing with monotheistics that come up where um, monotheists tend to believe that there's only one God, and that God uh, is all-encompassing, and even if I don't know, it's hard to explain.
is the creator God, is
Yeah,
before all, there is no God before me would mean that no other God is involved in like the creation of the world, for example.
yeah, and there's like no other God at all in a lot of this ideology. It's where
It would define God in such a way that the only thing you could call God is the single thing which creates everything else.
Yeah, where in current when you think of monotheism, it's usually this is my God, and if there is another God that is someone else's preaching, that's in competition with my God, and that God's not real. Whereas with polytheism, what happens is this is my God or gods, and it's real, and there's this other guy with their gods, and they're also real.
Which would be
So,
kind of like the Roman Empire's perspective.
yeah.
Like, we don't care what you worship, so long as we have, generally we have peace in the Roman Empire, right?
Yeah. It's a really weird thing because like polytheism will either merge the gods or just say that they exist for those people. Whereas monotheism is like, no, this is the God for you too. So it's a weird kind of thing, which is only really really modernistic and monotheistic in origin.
You think that all right, we've been going down a tangent for a while, so I kind of want to bring this back to the comic project. So other writers and artists have contributed to this project. Just tell us a little bit more about what you'd like to accomplish with the Veil War, and maybe what we could expect in the future.
With the Veil War, what I want to accomplish is pretty much to get funding for other projects. Uh, I know that sounds really weird and really basic, but that is my goal in all of this, is to just get funding for other projects so I can work on them. Uh, for a long time, it's really hard for me to come up with what's happening on this stuff because I had put it out of my mind for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was rights issues and all like that I had pretty much lost the rights on this.
Mm-hmm.
But then I relooked at the contract and I was like, no, that's perfectly fine. And because I had these other ideas that I wanted to do, and then I came back and I looked at this and I was like, okay, now that I've pretty much killed it in my mind for like the last decade, how do I revive it in my mind? So over the last week or so that I've been doing this, I've been relearning the stuff about it and reimagining like the things that were built up beforehand. Like when I launched the project, I did not remember that the main character was an orphan who was trained by Merlin. It's like, what's up with this? I have no idea. And then it suddenly came back to me. It's like, oh wait, that's what happened.
Maybe a way to describe this project is you had all this work done on it, but you've just had no opportunity to bring it to the public until Indiegogo has made that a possible option for you, right?
I would have done this a long time ago if I even thought about Indiegogo as a viable option.
This was originally an Image Comics pitch, right?
Yeah, and it was originally supposed to be an ongoing thing. If this if I get funding and people like it, then what will happen is I'm thinking that the it'll turn out to be three 48-page books. Just thinking it off the top of my head of where the scripts leave off and all like that, and how long it would take me to tell the story of the entire Veil War. Um, and then after that, again, if people like it, then I'll jump to the future of the story that I want to tell with this universe, or wanted to tell. And then there's also the possibility of I might go ahead and try to figure out how to do a first-person shooter, which would be the like you get to be one of the sides, either the fairy realm enemies or the humans trying to fight back against them in a first-person shooter, which I think is a really cool idea. It's just and other people are like, that's a really awesome idea because you have magic throwing creatures there and you have guns versus lightning bolts and fireballs and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I was like, yeah, that's cool. Unfortunately, I'm not really into first person shooters, and that really cost me, but
There's a lot of interesting ideas for
yeah,
down the road, and this is hopefully a jumping off point for that.
yeah. It's like it can go in a lot of different places.
So for
Uh,
anyone who joined us since the start of the stream, I'd like you to one more time give us like the basic, like what's the elevator pitch for the Veil War? What can people expect to see in it?
I was reading chat for a second. Could you repeat?
Oh, I was saying for people who have like joined the chat since the start of the stream and may have missed like the opening, like here's what the Veil War is about. Could you kind of describe basically like what's the elevator pitch for the Veil War? What can we expect to see?
Okay, basically, a few thousand years ago, a uh, a barrier between the fairy realm and the world of man was erected, and that cut off contact between all the mythical stuff that you think about in myths and legends from the rest of humanity, because some force thought that humanity just couldn't handle it against the rest of the creatures, pretty much. Then about 20, 30 years ago, a little girl orphan got somehow found her way into the fairy realm. She was found by Merlin, and she was raised by Merlin to be a sorceress.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's come back to the real world, or the Earth realm, and she wants to make it a better place. And because she has the knowledge of the fairy realm and of the of Earth, she wants to make everything her home and figure out all the problems. And because she's a sorceress, she has the ability to do that. And that's where the story starts off.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I want to come back so I can see the chat again. All right. Well, it's a really interesting idea. I can see how it's informed by some of your reading on myths and legends. What else would you like us to know about you as a creator?
Uh, I know I write a lot of stuff. My web novel is on Royal Road. If you want to go check that out, it's 49 chapters as of tomorrow, and that's the end of the first arc. It's about 1,000 words. Um, I'm also working on a bunch of scripts. Like you were asking me earlier about it, I have another idea where it's I call it Express Agent, and it's more that anime manga feel where it's just kind of fun. Um, when you go and look at like the FedEx department when you order a package, and you're sitting at your couch or whatever, and you hear the knock at the door, and you get up really quickly and you go to answer it, and then you discover there's no one there. But then you look down and there's a package, and you're like, how did that even happen? Like, I got up immediately. How could someone just run off this porch and get into a car and not be able to ever see it? That's the jumping off point of that idea, where it's like, how do they do that? And the kid tries to figure this out, and he learns that the UPS in this world, it's called FPS. They're hitmen, and the postal service is just a what's it called? Just a thing to hide what they're doing. So it's sort of like Hitman Reborn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the jumping off point of that. I haven't put too much thought in it, but the characters are named. The kid's name call sign is going to be Paperboy. The character that you're first introduced to is Express. There's the leader of this organization is Standard. There's Overnight, and then there's Freight. So it's kind of an interesting little thing there.
Are there any other video game franchises that have kind of fed you or given you inspiration?
Probably Final Fantasy.
Oh.
Xenosaga, Xenogears, Chrono Trigger.
I love that one.
Yeah, I love Chrono Trigger. They were doing a remake a few years ago, and I was attempting to be a voice actor within that worth the fan remake 3D thing. Didn't work out. Nintendo shut it down. But
of course.
What else? Have you heard of something Sonata?
Moonlight Sonata?
Yeah, I think it's Moonlight Sonata. It's a RPG.
I think I played the first little part of it with my college roommates, and I never finished it. But I think I know what you're talking about. It's like related to Beethoven or Mozart or something, right?
Yeah. It's really philosophical when I was not expecting that out of a game.
Huh.
Yeah, I like a lot of JRPG stuff. Not too big on the Western RPG stuff. I think that because of the way their mechanics are, they should flip how they do stats, though.
Huh.
It's always confused me why they do that, because the JRPG uses like a turn-based system usually, and when you go to hit, that's pretty much them rolling a dice, whereas with the Western RPG, it's always like your live-action stuff and you're hitting, so it shouldn't be rolling a thing. It should just calculate based on where you've hit it.
Yeah.
It's like it's never made sense that they've not switched that around.
Huh. So I have zero experience with like tabletop RPGs. So I'm guessing well, you were interested in game design. So does the mechanics of gaming inform your work as a storyteller at all? Is there ever any like crossover between that?
Okay, the thing with this is that I'm a world builder type person.
Yeah.
And I like to I create stories and ideas in whichever medium that I think best fits it. That's what I want to design for. And like I said, the Veil War was originally supposed to be a game idea, and it just took someone convinced me that it should be a comic. But a lot of my ideas go to game ideas and game universes. I originally did like TV show ideas, but it's a world to me. If the idea within the world fits better with one medium rather than another, then that's what I'll put it on. So it doesn't really inform me so much because they're all like different ideas. They're all like they all go in the same pool.
Gotcha.
Like there's many different rivers, but they all go in the same ocean.
Fascinating. We've been going for about an hour, which is usually what I do for a show. So I'd just like to give you a chance to say anything or maybe repeat anything you think that's important about the Veil War that you'd like people to know as a takeaway on this project.
I think it's a fascinating project that I think you'll enjoy. Even though I don't think it's my best work, I think it is because, beginner type stuff pops up. But I think it's a good work that everyone will enjoy, and you should pick it up. Again, it's mainly apocalyptic fantasy. If you like that type of stuff, then I'm pretty sure you'll like this. And it's also a little bit of a disaster type movie.
Yeah.
Type vibe thing.
I'll be interested I'll be watching the progress of this comic project, and I'll be interested to see more from you in the comics community.
And I suck at selling things, so please have mercy on me.
it's a learning curve for everyone. It's a completely different I had to like read books about sales to get like the business side of things because I was always off in like artistic never land of making everything pretty, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Dragon. You've been a great guest, and it was really fun talking to you about your ideas about myth and ancient culture. The project is The Veil War. The link to the Indiegogo is in the description below. Do you have any other website or Twitter or social media you'd like to plug?
You can find me on YouTube. I don't usually make videos. Every so often I'll have a stream or video, but it's very rare. You can subscribe to me there. I have a Twitter account. It's I should probably link that, but it's just my username, YouTube username Durakken. Same with Twitter. The account is Durakken. I have my web novel up on Royal Road. I'll have to post a link somewhere for that because the name is J, the symbol above the tilde, and then NK dash refuge.
You send that to me. I can update the description with that information.
It was a horrible choice for a name. I was just making a pun. And I never anticipated I was going to write all that much.
Right.
But you can go read it if you really want to. It's a sci-fi perverted web novel written sort of in the vein of like anime web novels, which means it's not great writing, but it's decent writing.
All right. Well, thanks for joining the show to tell us a little bit about your work, and I'll be interested to see more. I want to thank everyone in the chat for offering comments, and I want to thank my guests today for joining us today. With that, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will catch you soon. Later, everybody.